This is a transparent frog, and that is its beating heart. Known as a glass frog, it is native to Central American rainforests, and when I discovered they existed, I knew I needed some of my own. But I'd never kept amphibians before. As a result, this would be a real challenge. One mistake and it could all go very wrong. So, over 5,000 miles away from their natural habitat, where the conditions are, not tropical, I embarked on a journey to build a chunk of the jungle in my bedroom. Little did I know how it would evolve over the next 6 months. It all began with this second-hand Exoterra enclosure, which I was going to transform into a rainforest, and also all of these supplies. Maybe too many supplies. Well, I brought it to a bigger table, and got to work. Firstly, by removing the disgusting background it came with, and replacing it with a ghost wood branch, the centerpiece of the terrarium, which the plants will be able to grow all over. Speaking of plants, there would also be plants accompanying the branch, and plants need pots. So, I arranged the pots into suitable positions to fit in as many plants as possible, and locked them into place with spray foam, suspending the branch with rope as I spray foamed the entire back wall. Over the next 2 hours, this foam expanded, swallowing up the hardscape. But comparing this to a typical rainforest, I'm sure you can notice a difference. Usually rainforests aren't grey. To remedy this, I was going to need to silicone on some cocoa fibre to emulate the jungle environment. This meant chiseling away at the foam to make it neater, and expose its rough surface for the silicone to adhere to. After doing this, the back wall looked slightly less like it's from an alien planet. So we're good to go. I decided to use cocoa fibre as it retains water well, but unfortunately, as you'll soon see, it retains to the wall less well. Crazy foreshadowing, I know. To keep it firmly stuck to the hardscape, I applied many tubes of silicone everywhere, which is just an awful experience. Like, it smells disgusting and just glues to everything. But cocoa fibre is included in everything. So I dropped on piles of cocoa fibre in every crevice, patting it down to maximise its chances of setting correctly. While I left it all to set, I went to a plant shop in search of plants to occupy the pots and the substrate. Specifically, I wanted plants to offer hiding and hunting opportunities for the frogs, and after a long look around, I returned with 8 plants, which could hopefully get the job done. 3 days later, I returned to the terrarium with high hopes. Everything looked good, but there was one test remaining. I needed to wash down the back wall. Now, when I did this a year before for my first terrarium, it all went swimmingly. I was under the illusion that this time was going to be a repeat. However, I don't know if the pressure was too high, but immediately a giant chunk of cocoa fibre fell off, and that wasn't the end of it. After the wash, it looked, well, awful. But I still had one ace up my sleeve to recover this project: sphagnum moss. Wherever there was exposed silicone, I superglued clumps of moss, and you know what? It looked pretty good-ish. At this point, I was bored of just working with a wall. It was time to add the forest floor, beginning with a layer of leaker covered with a makeshift barrier to only let water in, which looks strange now, but was a saviour later on, and then added in the substrate. Now this is nice and all, but to really make it a glass frog's home, we need to make it overgrown. I added all the plants into the terrarium, which gave it a desperately needed pop of colour. I then left the plants for a week to settle in, and over this week, I implemented some technology to simulate the rainforest conditions. A heat bulb to keep temperatures high throughout the day, a thermostat to regulate those temperatures, and a full spectrum UV light to create a day-night cycle. I also added in a frog bowl filled with water for the frogs to chill out in. But there was another problem slowly creeping in, and you'll be surprised to know that on this occasion, I was prepared for it. A mold outbreak. But hold up, the outbreak hasn't happened yet. So to prevent it, let's make the terrarium bioactive by adding springtails, mini speckled woodlice, and giant orange woodlice, which are all detritivores and will eat the mold. Now, during this settling in period, I also went on holiday, found some reptiles, but more importantly, after a month of scouring the internet, I found a listing in the UK for some glass frogs. All I could find before was just frogs made of glass. So I immediately bought 3 of the not glass frogs, and the next day, they had completely sold out. I finally returned, and with the frogs arriving the next day, all needed to be perfect. Unfortunately, it was not. The substrate seemed to have completely flooded, and I thought that it was due to the frog pond leaking. So I drained the water and replaced it with a tub, thinking the problem was solved. How naive I was. At least over this period, the plants really had grown in, making my vision of an overgrown rainforest come to life. But now, after long last, it was time for the 3 frogs, which arrived in this bowl. And look at their organs! To get them into the enclosure, I slowly took off the lid and waited for one of the frogs to leap out. And eventually... one frog was in. Now on to the second, but what I didn't account for is that the first frog may try to jump back out, which was quite a surprise.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
But soon enough, the second frog bounded in, leaving the last frog, which I hadn't seen move once in the tub. So when it did finally hop out, it had a frog zoomy of sorts. After a little while, they seemed to be settling in nicely, so I think it's time for full transparency. Why are these frogs transparent? See what I did there? They've evolved, developing transparency mainly on their undersides as a means of camouflage, by being able to perch on translucent leaves and reducing shadows. Now, how does it become transparent? Well, these frogs sequester red blood cells in the liver, and the liver is covered in a reflective membrane. This means they have less hemoglobin in circulation, which therefore limits the size of the frogs, which is why they are very, very small. Now with these frogs, I had 3 main goals. I wanted to capture them hunting and catching food, I wanted to hold one in my hands, and I wanted to put a glass frog on a glass frog. You'll see what I mean. Speaking of food, after researching what these frogs liked, I chose some mealworms to feed them and put them in a suction cupped feeding tray. Now, what I maybe hadn't accounted for was the mealworms being twice the size of the frogs. And when night fell and the frogs awoke to hunt, they looked at the mealworms in amusement, like, do you really expect me to eat this? Seriously? I needed to find an alternative, and flightless fruit flies were the perfect option, so I dumped a couple hundred of them into the enclosure. However, there was also something else being unleashed into the rainforest. A tropical storm. Piggybacking off the misting system from my paludarium, this mist ensures high humidity throughout the day. Every evening, there would be a final storm, and then the lights would go out. As they're nocturnal, I would sit there in pitch black for hours each night, filming these frogs come to life and praying that I would get the money shot. I saw lots of jumping, and even the frogs vocalizing, calling out for a mate. But no eating, until a month later, where finally I caught a frog on the hunt. He locked onto many fruit flies, analysing his chances of success. And after hyping himself up to do it, he finally leapt. And missed. And there we go. He was not going to embarrass himself on camera. Now I have completed one of the objectives, but I still needed to pick one up. Now, do you remember the flooding foreshadowing? Well, all this raining from the misting system slowly raised the water level until it was very high and over the lip of the water bowl, flooding it. Here's the thing, I needed to add a drain to lower the water, but to do that, I would need to drill a hole into the glass, risking the entire terrarium shattering. So instead of draining the water from the bottom, the only other option was pumping the water from the bottom out the top. I ordered the necessary supplies, and while I was waiting, this arrived. A third glass frog. For weeks, all I could find online instead of real glass frogs were just these, so in order to get one back, I wanted to place a real glass frog on a frog made of glass. So I tried to pick one up, and after rudely waking him up, he hopped on. But seemingly, he didn't want to leave me. I thought he would be terrified of me, but he just climbed around my fingers, looking back at his home. This is my pet glass frog, and now with that objective ticked off, I just need to get him onto the glass frog, which he really didn't want to do. Maybe he thought it was real. I don't know, Google sure did. But eventually, after some gentle nudges in the right direction, he was on, albeit briefly. The supplies for the pump finally arrived. I unpacked it all and then threaded the tubing through the mesh at the top of the terrarium. I then put the other end into a state-of-the-art reservoir, a bucket, and used the pump to drain the water. And after having manually siphoned out water for months, this felt very refreshing. I then attached a filter to stop it getting clogged and shoved it right down to the drainage layer, wedging it under the makeshift barrier. And when I turned it on, the water was all pulled out. I had not seen the leaker dry for months. The water problem was at last fixed and the frogs could live in peace. And finally, I added back the frog bowl as I realized it was not the source of my water troubles. After 6 months, this jungle rainforest ecosystem has been fully established. The fruit flies reproduce in mass numbers, feeding on leaves. Their population is kept in check by the glass frogs. Any decaying materials or mold are kept in check by the springtails and woodlice, and when they die, they decompose, releasing nutrients into the soil, helping the plants. All this contributes to a self-sustaining ecosystem for this one-of-a-kind transparent species, the glass frog.